Nigel Farage, a prominent figure in British politics and a leading voice in the Brexit movement, has issued a stark warning to the Labour Party, predicting that they will come to regret their decision to ignore the growing public outrage over immigration. As the government inches closer to a new EU migrant deal, Farage argues that the Labour Party's dismissal of what he describes as a burning fury among the British people will backfire. With tensions high and immigration remaining a contentious issue, Farage's remarks tap into the concerns of many who feel that their voices are being sidelined in the debate over the country's future immigration policies. As the New Deal looms on the horizon, the question remains, will Labour's stance on immigration cost them dearly, or will they manage to navigate this politically charged issue without alienating a significant portion of the electorate?
Well, I mean, they're just negligible declines from all-time record numbers. I think one of the biggest things is house building. Everywhere you go within this constituency, there's 50 new houses here, 100 new houses there. We're told from the Labour government those targets from central government will double. So the impact on an area like this of just the new houses, with, by the way, no more GP surgeries, no new roads, is really, really big. So people are unhappy, and they feel that in the Brexit referendum and in voting for Boris, they voted for all of this to be put under control, and they've frankly been ignored. And that's why they voted for me here. That's why they voted for reform.
Nigel Farage expressed strong concerns about the government's handling of immigration and the related impact on local communities. He dismissed the recent small declines in immigration numbers as negligible, arguing that they don't address the root of the problem. Farage pointed out that one of the most significant issues is the rapid pace of house building across the country. Using the example of a specific constituency, he highlighted how new housing developments are popping up everywhere. 50 new houses here, 100 new houses there, with no corresponding investment in essential infrastructure like GP surgeries or roads. According to Farage, the lack of proper planning and resources to support these growing communities has left many people feeling frustrated and neglected. He further emphasized that during the Brexit referendum and subsequent elections, including the vote for Boris Johnson, people were promised that immigration would be brought under control. However, Farage argues that these promises have not been fulfilled, leaving voters feeling ignored and disillusioned. He believes that this growing dissatisfaction is a major factor behind the public's support for his stance on immigration and their desire for real change.
Yeah, chap at lunch was saying he met a bloke the other day in Ipswich, just up the road, 22-year army veteran living rough on the streets. And he said, well, how can it be that a bloke like that, that's got a few mental issues, PTSD issues, is on the street, and somebody crosses the channel and gets put in a 4-star hotel? It's the sense of unfairness. It's a sense of injustice, and it burns very, very strong. And if Yvette Cooper and Sir Keir Starmer think they can brush this issue under the carpet, they're wrong.
Nigel Farage passionately addressed the deep sense of unfairness and injustice felt by many Britons regarding the treatment of military veterans compared to migrants. He shared a story he heard from a man in Ipswich who had recently met a 22-year army veteran living on the streets, struggling with mental health issues, including PTSD. Farage contrasted this veteran's dire situation with that of migrants crossing the Channel, who, he pointed out, are often accommodated in 4-star hotels upon arrival in the UK. Farage argued that this stark disparity fuels a powerful sense of injustice among the public, who see it as fundamentally wrong that someone who served the country is left homeless while newcomers receive immediate support. He warned that Labour politicians like Yvette Cooper and Keir Starmer are mistaken if they believe they can ignore or downplay these strong feelings among the electorate. Farage's comments underscore his view that the government's approach to immigration is not only flawed, but also deeply unfair to those who have served the nation, further stoking public anger and resentment.
So we rely on imported doctors. What kind of madness is that? And the same for nursing. We've made nursing an unfashionable profession. We've not encouraged people. We've made them go to university to get degrees before becoming nurses. God knows why. And so we take nurses from Africa and places where they probably need it even more. So no, I think what these figures tell you through all the different sectors, whether it's skills with engineering, whether it's medical profession or care, is we need to be training our own people to do these jobs. And I say that with 9.4 million people of working age in Britain simply not working.
Nigel Farage criticised the UK's reliance on imported medical professionals, calling it madness, and highlighting a broader problem in the country's workforce and training systems. He questioned why the UK is dependent on doctors and nurses from abroad, particularly from countries like those in Africa, where these professionals are desperately needed. Farage pointed out that the UK has made nursing an unfashionable profession by requiring prospective nurses to obtain university degrees before they can begin their careers, a move he sees as unnecessary and counterproductive. As a result, the country has had to recruit nurses from other nations, which, according to Farage, exacerbates the healthcare shortages in those regions. He argued that the situation is reflective of a larger issue across various sectors, including engineering, medical professions, and care work. Farage believes that the UK should be focusing on training its own people to fill these roles, especially given that there are 9.4 million working-age Britons who are not employed. His comments emphasize the need for a shift in policy to invest in domestic training and education rather than relying on international labor to fill critical gaps in the workforce.
I've heard it all before. Priti Patel said all the same things. If you employ illegal migrant workers, we'll fine you. You may go to prison. Massive penalties for smugglers. Life imprisonment. None of it. And you could put 1,000 new enforcement officers in place. But if the European Court of Human Rights stops you deporting people, what difference does it make? Are very clear that a country is not a country without controlling its borders, and you'll never do that with that activist foreign court in Strasbourg, which, remember, stopped that plane taking off to Rwanda back in 2022. We are clear that is the first step.
I think at minimum, the UK will probably manage to overtake Canada as worst performing developed country over the next 4 decades.
Reform is led by the man who took Great Britain out of the European Union.
So I think that makes Britain singular and worthy of tremendous admiration.
The aim of reform is to bring back classic liberals and the moderate right.
Nigel Farage, who is the man who took Great Britain out of the European Union with Brexit and who now runs a political party in the UK called Reform.
The foundation of identity must be reclaimed and oriented correctly.
The aim of reform is to shake the conservatives up, let's say, and return the classic liberals and the moderate right to something approximating, what would you say, an orientation that's actually based on the fundamental principles of Western civilization itself.
British common law translated biblical narratives into effective policy.
Judeo-Christianity at the bottom, the democracy that emerges out of that as a consequence of the concept of the sovereignty and divine import of the individual, the family above that, the community, the city, the state, the nation, under God, that entire subsidiary structure, to return to an orientation that makes that primary and the foundation of identity itself.
British common law stands as a monumental achievement, says Jordan.
It probably did the most effective job of any modern state of translating the narrative structure of the Judeo-Christian biblical corpus into policy. And it did that
partly explicitly in its parliamentary structure, but it also did it even more wisely with its common law tradition.
If globalist liberals have overrun conservatives, what hides in Labour's shadows?
I mean, English common law is a complete bloody miracle. Bottom-up law. I mean, God, what a phenomenal accomplishment. I'm watching with apprehension as the UK populace wanders over the brink, going to elect a Labour government in all likelihood.
Self-governance will distill Britain's thoughts and aspirations.
This concerns me a lot because if the Conservatives have been overrun by globalist liberals with a progressive agenda, I can't imagine who's lurking in the background on the Labour side. Well, I can imagine because I worked in universities, so I actually know exactly who's lurking in the background. And so I'm very apprehensive about what a Labour government will do to the UK.
Jordan claims that the UK will probably manage to overtake Canada as the worst performing developed country.
And the hopes and aspirations of those that voted for them, and I gave them considerable help with that victory, the thoughts and aspirations were that with self-government, the numbers coming into Britain would reduce. With self-government, illegal immigration could be effectively dealt with. And another crucial group, 5.5 million men and women running small businesses, acting as sole traders, believed that the massive regulatory rule book that had been put on top of everybody, taking away their time, their effort, that could be reduced so that we could encourage entrepreneurship, we could encourage real economic growth. And so the Conservatives were riding on the crest of a wave, and many said, well, I mean, Boris Johnson will be Prime Minister for 15 years. And what has happened over the last 5 years, in my view, is they have betrayed all of those hopes in absolutely every way. Elected as Conservatives, but they've governed as metropolitan Liberals. They introduced net zero policies. I mean, so insane was some of it that Boris even suggested that we take out of production 30% of our farmland and rewild it. When it came to getting rid of regulations, basically nothing was done. In fact, arguably, for many sectors, they're now living under more bureaucratic control now than they were as members of the European Union.
The government abandoned plans to turn legislation into asylum centres. These English politicians, they speak separately from people.
This is a situation in Ireland that's been developing probably since November 2022, when the government here decided to abandon all planning legislation, allow office buildings to be turned into asylum centres, mainly for single males in the 18 to 30 kind of category, and impose those centres into mainly working class communities. communities which are already devoid of any real services and are abandoned in general by the political and NGO class. And we have in Ireland now a country that's run by politicians who are more interested in what their European masters think of them than they are about the Irish people. We've a political and NGO class which is beholden to woke liberalism, and we have, you wouldn't believe, in this country 33,000 NGOs who receive 6.5 billion euro per year and employ around 200,000 people to lobby government.
And the big one is legal immigration. And just to give people some context on this, in the late 1940s, it was very much felt that we owed a huge debt to the British Empire, British Commonwealth, because in two world 40% of the contribution came from the Commonwealth. Canada, of course, your home country, being one of the most remarkable of them. And so began legal immigration from the West Indies and elsewhere. And it ran all through the late 40s, the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, right up until Tony Blair got in. It ran all through that period with a net migration level of 30 to 40,000 people a year.
Murray is worried about the United Kingdom in these circumstances.
Malachy, how does this happen? We've got an audience here yesterday, over the weekend and today who are looking at this and saying this wouldn't be allowed to happen in England. And these politicians, they speak separately from people. People feel totally detached on this, that they have no say in this whatsoever. How does this situation come about that the politicians are so out of touch?
There's a total disconnect between the Irish political class and ordinary people. If you look at what happened last week, for instance, on Monday, now the protest in Coolock has been going on. There's been people sitting outside that protesting in the camp for 3.5 months with no violence, no difficulties, and the police moved in at 3:30 on Monday morning and moved them out. And that led to some difficulties during the day, and there was a JCB digger burnt out. But what exacerbated the situation was that the Gardaí, and the people who are doing what they call rioting, and you come from the north, Eamon, the rioting in Dublin, wouldn't even merit the name riot in Belfast.
The woke liberals claim migration is essential for the health service.
There'll be a monarchy. I would worry about the United Kingdom in these circumstances. As you say, Piers, the gains Sinn Féin made in the local elections, historic gains, should be troubling to anyone who is, like me, a unionist. Sinn Féin, of course, is an Irish nationalist party and is as well, in my own view, an extremist party. And that isn't mere rhetoric. Mary Lou McDonald, the head of Sinn Féin, has an unbelievable track record. Just that you mentioned earlier, there's only one statue to in Europe, and it sits in the park in Dublin. Sean Russell, an IRA member who was on a German U-boat in 1940. There's a statue to him in Dublin, and Sinn Féin always pay their respects there. Mary Lou McDonald a couple of years ago was taken there to pay her respects. She was, as it were, bloodied by the more militant wings of Sinn Féin. That's totally normal in Sinn Féin history. It's not just that they were an extremist party in the past, it's that they are in the present. It's not just that they're Irish nationalists, that they are actually extreme Irish nationalists, violent Irish nationalists, always have been, and seem to continue to be. I think it's an incredibly worrying development. As you say, alongside the ongoing success electorally of the Scots nationalists in the north, it's certainly possible we could see the breakup of our country. It's something where I think everyone who recognises that the United Kingdom's been an enormous force for good in the world should really be very worried about. We should be very troubled by that. Jordan warns of the havoc a Labour government could wreak on the UK.
Well, we've gone from a population of 3.5 million to a population of over almost 5.5 million now, without building any infrastructure to deal with that. We have a shortage of hospitals, we have a shortage of schools, but most particularly we have a shortage of housing. We have 14,000 people in emergency accommodation, Irish nationals. in emergency accommodation. The average price for a new house in this country now is about 450,000, which Dublin City Council somehow thinks is affordable. We have average rents for a one-bedroom apartment in Dublin, €2,000, a three-bedroom house, €3,500. And the woke Liberals will tell us, oh, well, we need migration to run the health service. Well, if we didn't increase the population the way we did, the health service wouldn't be under the strains it's under. And also, our own doctors and nurses are being forced to emigrate because they can't afford to live here. So if they could stay, we wouldn't need to import the people. But we've a class that believe, and they talk about international obligations and the law. As far as I'm concerned, the government's obligation is to its own people. And we had the ludicrous situation, for instance,